Hi everyone, my name is Professor Michael Vesely, and whether you're watching this live on the feed right now or you're watching the recording, I want to thank you for your interest in the University of Maryland Francis King Carey's Master of Science in Law program. Your interest in the Homeland Security track is greatly appreciated by me and everyone else who teaches within our track. So, there's a lot of different questions about what is this program specifically. You can look through any catalog online and see just the plethora of master's degrees that exist. But we think our degree is unique for multiple reasons. First, this degree is built for working professionals. That doesn't mean it's easy. There's a lot of reading, there's a lot of writing, but everyone who teaches in this program understands the various life commitments that you have going on while you're pursuing your degree. We understand that there are family and health and all kinds of work demands that are put on your time, and we are very respectful of that time and try to use the time we share together in the most efficient manner possible. So most of our students in this program tend to be people who are at a crossroads in their career, maybe 12 or 15 years in, and they're saying, what now? Do I want to keep pursuing what I'm doing? Do I want to change the direction my career is going? And I'm looking for a skill set to enable that to happen. And what we try to do in the Homeland Security track is give you both information about where the law is, both from a regulatory, a statutory, a case law, a policy perspective, and work with you so that it meshes with the kind of work you're doing in your day-to-day life. Now, just because many of our students are mid-career does not mean that all of our students are in the same position. We also have some people who are fresh out of college, and to those of you I say congratulations, they've just gotten their BA or their BS, and they're looking for some type of specialization to add to their resume. And this degree is very, very useful for those individuals as well. In fact, this kind of diversity in student range, having both recent graduates all the way up to people who are ending a first career, provides for useful discussion. It provides for useful insights when we're interacting on our discussion boards or in our video conference chats. So, thinking about what does this program look like? What are you going to be doing? Basically, we are giving you legal expertise in these very specific areas. There's also a cybersecurity track online, and in the Homeland Security track, we're going to be looking at the full range of Homeland Security initiatives, operations, laws, ranging from classic counterterrorism issues, things that we deal with national security, whether it's identifying potential threats, how we prosecute, and I'll talk about each of these courses in a moment. And then we're also going to talk about moving into kind of the related parts of Homeland Security, emergency management, how do we deal with natural disasters, and the final component we'll be looking at, public health component of national security and emergency management. And I'll speak a little bit more about each of the courses you'll take in a moment. Homeland Security, we can't escape where the modern paradigm begins with September 11th, 2001, and the reorganization of government, the creation of a new cabinet secretary, movement of traditional agencies away from where they were situated into the Department of Homeland Security, and the wide array of disciplines they represent. Most of our students have some interest in either working directly in government or in consulting agencies, firms that interface with government, and we fully understand and try to give you information in these courses that's useful to pursuing those career objectives. I should also note that one of the tricky balances in academia is always figuring out how much theory should we give you versus how much practical knowledge. As I said, most of our students are at least part of the way through a first career. So you've already acquired a great deal of firsthand experience, and we don't want to bog you down with things that are not useful to you. There are moments where you're going to have to just absorb and learn some basic legal theory for any of this to make sense. But every single person, every single professor you encounter in one of these tracks is not just a theorist, they are a practitioner. So they also have that hard-earned experience that only doing a job can give you. And we will make sure, and because of we will make sure that each of these practitioners is right on the cutting edge of what's developing, both in terms of what's going on in Congress, what's going on in operations, whether that's in deployments, all the way down to what's going on in local policy, so we can share with you the full gamut of our knowledge and experience. So when you enter this program, it's a very efficient program. You can finish this thing in 4 consecutive semesters, 15 months. It's a lot of work. There's a lot of reading, there's a lot of writing. None of it is designed to be superfluous or just time fillers. Everything we do in this course is trying to build your skill set in multiple ways. On the one hand, the work you're going to be doing, the reading, the writing, the discussing, the argumentation, it's meant to give you that subject matter expertise you need to either advance in your current job or change fields into a new position. On the other hand, the method by which you approach this information is meant to make you a legal scholar of sorts. It's meant to give you the technical writing, the technical capabilities that come with legal writing, and to begin thinking in terms of how you construct an argument, how you approach an oppositional argument, the way someone who has a legal background would do that. Many of our students who are enrolled in this program are people who don't have the time or interest to go and get a Juris Doctorate, go through the whole law school process, but they have to interface with lawyers regularly or other regulators. So they need to know what's going on and be able to speak the verbiage. Our program will give you that ability. One of my all-time best students in this program is an NSA analyst, so I don't know exactly what she was working on, but she said one of the greatest strengths of being in this program was that it gave her the how, the why, and the what can I do afterwards. So frequently she said, I'd be at Fort Meade working on some project and a supervisor would say, you're not allowed to do X, Y, and Z. And this program gave her the legal background to understand what was the rationale or what was the justification for not allowing her to do X, Y, and Z. So in terms of the program, it's 4 semesters. It's a lot of reading, a lot of writing. You're going to get to know the people in your cadre extremely well because each week you're going to be interfacing with each other, discussing some of the issues, discussing the material you encounter. Myself and the other professors will also be engaged with you. We'll provide you written feedback every single week, but we're also available all the time for live chats, phone calls, and we are everyone who's teaching in this program wants to be teaching in this program. So we're all extremely responsive. We tell people generally during the week expect a response within 24 hours, 48 hours for some weekends, but most of us respond almost immediately because we are all motivated and love teaching people some of the practical aspects of the careers we've picked as well. We find this information fascinating. We love it. So to get the chance to share it with other people is truly, truly rewarding. So in your first semester, you're not going to get into any of the specialty Homeland Security courses. Instead, you're going to be focused on some of the kind of broad legal approaches, legal thinking, and the methodology that people with a legal professional background need. So you're going to be working in a course that introduces you to the American legal system, at large. You're also going to be taking a class on legal research, and you'll learn how a lawyer researches and builds a case, builds a brief, develops a counterargument, all of those kind of critical skills. In your second semester, you will begin taking your specialty courses. In the Homeland Security track, the first course you take is Introduction to Emergency Management. That course is going to look at, when we think about emergency management, most people kind of immediately think of FEMA, but FEMA is only one part of this overall structure. FEMA is the federal lead on emergency management. We'll discuss what the Stafford Act is. What does it mean when there's an emergency declaration versus a major disaster declaration? We'll talk about how does FEMA interface with state government, and most importantly, the local governments. What does it mean when a county executive or mayor issues a mandatory evacuation order? Can people be arrested for trespassing if they don't leave their own homes? We'll also look at some of the big historical events that have transpired in the last 20 years. We'll look at some of the consequences of Hurricane Katrina. We'll see what went well, and we'll look at what didn't go so well. We'll discuss how the legal and policy landscape changed after the storm in New Orleans. We'll get into some of the Deepwater Horizon issues with the BP oil spill. We'll look at Superstorm Sandy. We'll look at some of the California wildfire issues. And what's so interesting about emergency management is there are lots of different ways that it interfaces with different disciplines. You can look at emergency management from a traditional law enforcement perspective. What does it mean when we have military gear being sold to local police forces? Moving into things like property management. Should we allow people to rebuild on barrier islands? Should the government provide insurance for recurring loss properties? All the way to things to conservation efforts when we talk about forest management, the fire service. What does it mean to be a paramilitary organization? All the way into issues that begin to touch on things like pandemics and opioids, but you'll have that more in your third semester. In that second semester, you're also going to take one of those survey courses that's necessary for the program. You're going to learn about administration and regulatory law. In the United States, most of our laws, most of what we have to adhere to every single day is not made by Congress, even if we're talking about federal law. Usually what happens is Congress passes a large statute, and then if the president signs it or there's an override, it becomes the law of the land. But there's all kinds of gaps left in these statutes. So for example, Congress might pass the Clean Air Act and say that there's a duty to keep the air quality at a certain condition. But Congress isn't going to say what the particulate matter parts per billion should be. That's left to the regulatory agencies. So the agencies like the SEC or the EPA or the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, they all have this authority underneath their legislation to create the regulations necessary to implement the law. You're going to be encountering that in your second semester. You'll learn all about administrative review, administrative rulemaking. It's critical in Homeland Security to understand how these other regulations are developed. In your third semester, you'll be fully ensconced in specialty courses. So in the Homeland Security track, you'll be taking one class on public health emergencies. That class picks up kind of where the emergency management class leaves off. You're going to be looking at some of the big issues like what does it mean when there's an issue from HHS or CDC concerning quarantine and isolation. Imagine that you are someone who, you went to Grand Central Terminal in New York City, and you were just meeting your mom there, and you pick your mom up and you take your mom back to your apartment, visits for a week, and then you send her home. And then 3 days later, there's a knock on your door from a public health official who's saying, you were in Grand Central Terminal on this date at this time. That means you were exposed to whatever live agent was there that day. You are not allowed to leave your apartment under threat of arrest until further notice. What does that mean? What does that mean to be told you are now under quarantine? Or you're being detained and being isolated from the population at large? What if you're not showing any symptoms? How can you challenge that? These are some of the kind of large, big public health issues you'll address in the public health emergency course. You'll also get into issues surrounding the current opioid crisis. What does it mean when we start rationing supplies? Can we close our borders? There's been a global epidemic outbreak. It's a fascinating course. It really kind of, you'll get introduced to some of these issues in the emergency management course, but the public health emergency course really kind of brings them to the fore and puts a nice, kind of a nice cap on them. The other course you'll take in your third semester is the kind of cornerstone class of the entire program. It's Homeland Security and Counterterrorism. That course will begin with a little bit of history, talking about, we all, understand kind of both intellectually as well as emotionally what that September 11th means to us. But we're going to look at, historically, what were the immediate changes? What did the Homeland Security Act do? What does the Patriot Act do? And from there, we're going to kind of, once we get that history under our belt, we're going to start looking at how does this play out? We'll spend some time looking at the NSA. What does downstream mean? What is PRISM? Can the NSA target me and take my information? What does it mean when they're gathering metadata on me? What are the limitations? If I'm a U.S. citizen, can you do different things to me or approach my information in a different way when I'm visiting a family member in Canada than when I'm sitting in my own home or at my office? We'll also talk about issues about concerning interdiction and designation of terrorists and terrorist groups. We'll talk about asymmetrical warfare. We'll talk about using drones. What's the legal justification for that in the field of battle? We'll also talk about some of the arrests, detentions, and interrogations that took place in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Guantanamo Bay created a whole branch of jurisdiction and revisited issues that the United States hadn't been forced to confront very much since World War II. What is an enemy combatant? What's the legal status or rights of those individuals? Can they be processed by a military tribunal or a military commission? This is an area, what do we do with someone who the government says, we're not going to try them, but we're also not going to release them? These are large, fundamental, legal, constitutional, philosophical issues. And once you're done this class, you'll always know what those designations mean. And so when you see a news report about someone being designated a foreign operative or a terrorist or an enemy combatant or an enemy belligerent, all of those terms will make complete sense to you, and you'll be able to navigate both everyday life and as well as careers in Homeland Security better. We'll also talk about in this course what are enhanced interrogation practices, how are they different or not different from torture, what happens when the government uses an enhanced interrogation practice that would typically run afoul of the Constitution and wants to introduce the evidence gleaned from such methods at trial. Is it permissible? Are there limitations? We'll also talk about secret evidence. What happens when what happens when an individual who's been detained by the government wants to, is going to, basically, we call it gray mail, but it's almost a form of testimonial blackmail. They come before the court and say, if you try to prosecute me, I'm going to tell the secrets about what you did to me while I was being detained. How does the government deal with that? What is the silent witness rule? We're going to go through all of those various components in the Homeland Security course. In your final semester, you're going to be taking two different classes. One, the first of these is you're going to take the survey class from the cybersecurity track, and that is Introduction to Cybersecurity. It's a critical component of what DHS works on. As we look at the kind of what are the current threats with the Internet of Things, as our lives become more integrated into information systems, what are the security policies in place? What does it mean to breach those? Can we face liability for not having sufficient cyber insurance or having the right level of encryption. All of these issues are critical, and what you're going to find is that the topics that we touched on, especially in emergency management and the Homeland Security course, tie directly into these larger cyber issues. And in the years to come, we're going to be facing more and more of these cyber challenges, and you're going to see how the reasoning that created the law around Homeland Security is going to come back into focus and be applied into the world of cybersecurity as well. The other thing you'll be doing in your final semester is working on a capstone project. It's a major writing endeavor. You won't have many readings for that class. You won't have many sessions. You won't have assignments due throughout the semester, apart from some of the milestones and deliverables associated with the final project. And what you'll be doing is working on one specific issue. And we have a great deal of there's a great deal of flexibility, both in terms of what is the actual format or medium of the final product, and also a great deal of flexibility in terms of, well, what do you want to write about? So I think some examples here would be extremely useful to kind of contextualize what these projects might look like. So in terms of the formats, most people tend to write an extremely, most people tend to write a paper that it's not quite the level of a master's thesis, but it's a significant paper, significant research paper, but not just categorizing the current state of the law, but looking ahead, what can we expect in the future, what are some of the changes that would be beneficial, and advocating for some of those changes. Part of being a specialist in the law is not just knowing what the law is, but being able to advocate for various positions for a client. That's going to be one of the major components in the capstone. So some people write more of a traditional term paper. I've had some people develop full-blown plans along with explanatory text saying how they'll be integrated. I've had some students write proposed legislation and have actually tried to introduce it in various state legislatures. So in terms of medium, there's lots of different ways to approach this. Then in terms of topic area, there's also been a great deal of variety in the type of topics that I've seen students write about. I've seen some students focus more on the public health, writing about one of the best ones I ever saw was a student writing about the opioid crisis in the context of prison reform, looking at some of the issues that come in with the 8th Amendment. I've had a student write about what would happen if there was a outbreak of bubonic plague that practically closed down courts in the United States. I had one student write about the Bank Secrecy Act. What does that mean in the context of foreign terrorist organizations and material support for terrorism, which are some of the biggest issues and some of the kind of the largest tools in the prosecutor's belt, so to speak. I've had students write about school security, especially at the primary grade levels. So there's a wide range of topics that have been approached by different students in their capstone. And in the Homeland Security track, you can pick a topic that focuses on emergency management, one that focuses more on counterterrorism, one that focuses on national security policy, one that focuses on public health emergencies. So you have a great deal of leeway depending on what area you specifically want to focus on. So lastly, in my last couple minutes with you this afternoon, I want to talk to you about what some of our students have done with their degrees. So some of my students have moved from technical analyst positions into large-scale policy making, especially in our security-oriented agencies here in the United States. I had one student who worked in media and has shifted her area of focus in terms of the types of stories she builds for C-SPAN, the types of stories she develops, she produces, she reports on. Now that she has this background in Homeland Security, it has opened her up to a whole range of different types of policy issues she can report on. I've had one student who actually became a full-time emergency manager, and she was a deputy in one office, and she's moved over into emergency management. I've had many students move up in terms of the promotions they seek, because now they don't just have technical expertise in whatever their original background was. They can merge that technical expertise with this legal expertise, this policy expertise that this program does provide you. So I want to close by saying, if you have any interest at all, you can email msl@law.umaryland.edu. I am happy to talk further with any of you in any kind of medium that would be useful to you. By phone, email, video chat. If you're in the Baltimore, DC metro area, I'm happy to meet with you in person. I hope that some of my enthusiasm and passion for the subject material as well as this program has come through to you today, because every single person, every single professor, every single administrator you would encounter here at the University of Maryland brings that same kind of passion throughout your entire student life here in our MSL program. Thank you again for your interest. Best of luck, and I hope to see you in the coming semesters.